So for my project, I chose to do my washing project on the Volkswagen Dieselgate fraud case. So the scandal began in 1990 when the Supreme Court of the United States made amendments to the Clean Air Act of 1963, which effectively put emission standards on lightweight vehicles in the United States. These amendments called for two new sets of standards to be implemented. The first set was rolled out in 1997, and the other set was rolled out in 2004. These staggered set of standards were designed to allow auto manufacturers time to develop and roll out new technologies that would limit and reduce emissions from their products without crippling their business. In 1990, the development of the three-way catalytic converter proved to be an effective way of limiting the emission of nitrogen oxide in gas engines. However, these catalytic converters did nothing to reduce the nitrogen oxide emissions of diesel-powered engines and left the automotive industry with an expensive problem. This would require companies to invest millions of dollars into research and development in order to create a product that would comply with these new regulations. By the time 2004 rolled around and the second wave of regulations began to be put in place, Volkswagen still had not addressed the issue. They became faced with a dilemma. One option was to purchase the rights from Mercedes to use their selective catalytic reduction system. Buying the rights for the system would have cost Volkswagen millions, on top of the fact that this system was expensive to produce and required large amounts of maintenance. Or Volkswagen could use their own lean nitrogen oxide trap in their diesel vehicles. The problem with this was Volkswagen's system did not actually work and failed to meet the second wave of standards rolled out in 2004. The Volkswagen system could hypothetically meet nitrogen oxide standards, but at the cost of fuel efficiency and vice versa. Meaning, in order for the system to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions to legal levels, the car wouldn't be able to run fuel efficiently enough to be economically viable. Sometime in 2006, upper management decided to program the engine control unit, which is the computer and electronic systems in the engine of their diesel vehicles, to switch from high nitrogen oxide emissions to good fuel efficiency, to switch from high nitrogen oxide emissions and good fuel efficiency to low nitrogen oxide emissions and bad fuel economy when it sensed the emissions were being tested, especially in a lab setting. Meaning, when the car was being used by consumers on an everyday basis, the car's emissions were way higher than the legal amount, but when put in testing conditions, the car emissions would comply. Volkswagen was intentionally selling vehicles as compliant with emission standards when they were aware that this was not the case. They described their diesel engines as clean as or cleaner than the US and California requirements while providing good fuel economy performance. In the US, Volkswagen received tax exemptions as well as grants and subsidies for producing vehicles with emissions at or below the standard. So in 2014, Peter Mock, the managing director of the International Council on Clean Transportation in Europe, conducted a series of on-the-road tests to U.S. vehicles in the hopes of showing Europeans that it was possible to run diesel cars with low emissions. The U.S. emission standards are higher than the European standards, and Mock hoped to use U.S. cars as an example for how European countries should set their standards. Major issues became evident when they ran tests on the Volkswagen Passat and the Volkswagen Jetta, leading Mock to contact Joe German, the co-lead of the U.S. branch to the International Council on Clean Transportation. This marked the beginning of the end for Volkswagen. Emissions testing in the U.S. confirmed that nitrogen emission rates from Volkswagen diesel engines were 5 to sometimes 35 times higher than acceptable levels. In 2015, the United States Environmental Protection Agency issued a notice of violation of the Clean Air Act. 3 days after that, Volkswagen, Martin Winterkorn resigned. On the same day, branch development lead Heinz Jakob Nesser, research and development head Ulrich Hackenberg, and research and development head Wolfgang Hatz were all suspended. On May 3rd, 2018, Martin Winterkorn was charged with fraud and conspiracy, and as of today, Volkswagen has paid $33 billion in fines and settlements in the United States and Europe. There's Martin right there. And Martin was the CEO of Volkswagen at the time. All right. So this case meets the five characteristics of fraud. First off, Volkswagen was selling their vehicles under the false pretext uh, that they were in fact in line with the U.S. and European diesel emission standards when this was not the case. Volkswagen also took tax breaks and money from the government for producing green emission vehicles. Number two, consumers purchased these vehicles with the idea in mind that they were driving cars that met government standards. The government released funds to Volkswagen thinking they had met their guidelines. Number three, Volkswagen management knew their vehicles without a doubt did not meet the governmental regulations in both the US and the UK. Number four, both consumers and the US government relied on these false test results and spent millions of dollars with Volkswagen. And number five, consumers spent top dollar on a vehicle that was illegal to drive in the US and did not meet emission standards. Volkswagen took US dollars under false advertising and did not pay fines or taxes on their actual emissions. So the triangle of fraud, the incentive was the purchasing the rights from Mercedes or inventing their own process would have been extremely costly to Volkswagen. The rationalization was, as the deadline approached, rigging the test seemed economical, and upper level management were aware that they could pass these tests under the lab conditions. And then number three, opportunity. Upper management saw the chance to collect subsidies, tax write-offs, and the ability to sell automobiles in the U.S. with no investment prior on their part. So one of the solutions that I thought of when these tests were actually underwent the on the road test, it became clear that they were not meeting these emission standards. So I believe that nowadays, with it as advanced as the technology in these vehicles are, lab testing cannot be the sole determinant of whether or not that these cars do meet these standards. On-road tests need to be made part of the emission standard testing procedure. And here are my sources. Thank you so much.